Good afternoon. And sorry, let me apologize first because I've lost my voice, so you bear with me. Hopefully you will understand and hear me. The discussion sorry, this afternoon, it's about talk about large African companies, but I'd like to put it into context so you understand the angle. I think about a year ago or 2 years ago, there was a discussion on large African companies, and it was really in terms of their impact on the economies in the countries, where there are impacts on jobs, et cetera, et cetera. The idea today is still talk about large African companies, how they are being financed, but more importantly, when they say the next generation, how can we support today medium-sized companies to become, the large African companies of tomorrow? So a big part of the discussion, the focus will be on that. I will put out some general ideas, and my various colleagues here will have some specific questions for them. If we were to look at some of the large African companies and window them today, we have many of them in South Africa investing in the rest of Africa, or also in Nigeria investing all over. A lot of them, they are either in the financial services sector, or now more and more they are on telecom and media, and some of the very few though are more on some manufacturing, if you take Dangote, Cement, or others. Now, what you have seen, we also have now Kenyan companies going actually a lot to the rest of East Africa, whether it's Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, expanding more on that side. So, which is good news, we see more on that. And obviously they have created jobs and help support the local SMEs. But part of the question is, why small and medium-sized companies, and let's say here particularly the medium, they face constraint in terms of funding. Banks don't fund them the same way they would fund large companies. I think we need to look at the context, the environment in which we're looking. You cannot just blame banks, but they don't put long-term funding to those companies. But look at the context, the kind of regulatory infrastructure that you need that are not around. Credit bureau, for example. Somebody was talking about Simon earlier, that you don't need that because of the mobile phone, mobile payment, you have a lot of information. But in the formal system, you don't have, for example, the credit bureaus or proper collateral registries, or even more important, in certain countries where you have some of the regulatory framework in place, you don't have enforcement. I mean, leasing is something that we have tried to develop. I can talk from our own experience. You can put the best law, best regulation in place. But frankly, if I'm a leasing company and you don't pay me, and I cannot collect the equipment, let's say we're doing financial lease, I cannot go and reprocess it because of judiciary and stuff like that, even if the laws are there. Sorry. So we're not going anywhere. So we'll put all of this into the context. But we are talking about capital markets. I remember Colin Coleman was saying, taking an example of the illiquidity of those markets, and the way they're so tight, they are tiny, except maybe South Africa. So how can you issue papers in those markets? Very few. And it's a way, for example, to get long-term funding, often local currency when you need them, from contractual savings, whether bank or, whether pension or insurance, particularly life insurance company and so on. So this is the broad context. So the speakers will ask them to maybe introduce themselves as needed, but I will start with Eric on my left. I wanted to give people on the floor the opportunity to ask a few questions. Obviously, you can imagine that I'm not myself too directive.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to add to the controversy, I think we spoke about SMMEs. I don't think that the bankers should classify them as one group. You're talking about small companies and you're talking about medium companies in Africa. There's very different challenges that those companies are faced with. So I think it's become a term that we commonly use, But I think if one is to dig a little bit deeper, we actually should be dealing with them separately.
All right, thank you. Sir? The microphone, there's somebody who wants to ask a question, please. Mr. Jomande ate well at lunch, so you know.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I guess just two questions. First, I ask myself, we're talking about financing new generation of large African companies. The first question that I have is, what are current large African companies doing that make us want to create more of them? And the second one is, haven't we learned anything from too big to fail? I don't know, I'm sure you all probably remember that, certainly here back in New York, on September 2008. I think the last gentleman, I believe it was Alex, he said something to me that is very, very important. First, we're talking about countries where illiteracy rate is so huge. People don't even know how to write their names. And yet, we want to make them savvy of the new tool in the financial sector. Again, for me, we really have to look at things very differently. We will not solve any problem in Africa through the current lenses that we're wearing here on Wall Street. I don't see that happening. Second, you have now, it's incredible. People don't know how to read and write, but they know how to send money using mobile technology. I believe the challenge for us is to look into those small businesses because, as I say, necessity is the mother of all inventions. People have found ways to cope. So if we are not ahead of that curve, I don't think we're going to be able to solve anything. Oftentimes, government is more part of the problem than solutions. So I think there are some very creative minds in Africa, but one thing that I learned in New York is that the financial sector here is so creative that there is no problem that they can't solve. So that's the kind of thinking we really have to, engage on in Africa if we really want to make any change. So please, it's important, big companies, but again, small businesses are more the norm than actually the exception in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take a second question if we have, and then maybe we'll answer both questions instead of one by one? If there is a second question. Otherwise, I am going to do it like if you have an auction. Second question once. Good.
Hello, I'm Lolade Mustafa. I'm an attorney and consultant based in Washington, D.C. And I am amazed at this entire event because there haven't been many young people represented on any of the panels. You don't see anyone. Well, you're one person.
Are you saying that I'm an old man?
I'm not.
It's just my voice.
I'm not saying anything. But with
I have a voice problem today, but otherwise.
I know. But with the development in mobile technology, apps that are being created, there are a lot of young people. When I mean young, I'm talking less than 30, who are doing some amazing things and gaining a lot of traction, and we don't see any representation of that here. And this is the new trend. This is where we're going. And I'm wondering if we can speak about how to, from a culture that is very deferential to those who are more matured, how can we, that's how I'm gonna say it, how can we incorporate more young people who are creating different types of business models? How can we incorporate them to the dialogue? Thank you. All
right, so we'll go to the first question, and if I will do both. Let me start with the first one. I will ask my colleagues to answer, but one comment about the large African companies. You say, what do they do?
I think that...
you want to go ahead.
I think that the large African companies that are successful are able to create a case study for what is possible on the continent, right? So, for instance, convincing Viacom to invest in Africa needed us to be able to tell stories of companies that invested on the continent and started small and grew organically and became bigger, right? So Viacom's model is not to necessarily fund you with a slush fund for you to build a business. It's to enable you to start a business with the brand that it has, XYZ. But organically, we had to grow our Africa business and find creative ways to be able to make money and run it cost effectively in a way that meant that we can grow over time. What the bigger companies that have become successful are able to show, and the service that what they really do for us is that it gives investors confidence that if you can come to the continent and be able to find companies and grow companies that can return you a lot of value over time, whether it's the banks, there are a lot of banks that have been very successful, or whether they're telecom operators. I think from that standpoint, they are doing us that service of being great case studies for what is possible on the continent, that you can actually grow these companies that are, again, African companies.
Any other comment?
The first question on sort of what the big companies are doing to help the next generation of entrepreneurs. I think that from our side as a fund, we've been open to, and we're having conversation with some of the big telcos to be LPs in our fund. Essentially, the way we sell the story to them is that, look, I mean, MTN was not existent 15 years ago, and somebody invested in that idea for it to become what it is. So MTN should be able to seed the next generation of entrepreneurs that you were talking about, the younger generation, which in my view are sort of what I call the creative. They're going to create, they're enabling the creative sector. So if you look at the first generation connected Africa to the rest of the world, which is the connectivity part, so mobile, broadband, submarine cables, I was involved in that. This next generation is going to build the next Google, and the next Alibaba is going to come from Africa. That's the company that we want to finance. So we are very clear in our vision that there is a strong creative entrepreneurial spirit that is being unleashed on the continent. And if we can bring smart capital in to partner with experience, these companies will be phenomenal. And the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be another renaissance of large African companies that will come out.
Go ahead.
Okay. I wanted sort of the last part about illiteracy is that I think that there's some level of technology that you can use to address illiteracy. So you give the example of a farmer who could not read and write, but now can store money on their phone so can do transactions. Right? And I think that we need to, and I agree with you that we need to look more into how we replicate that. So for example, one of my mentee companies is a company called Farmerline. So we're developing a next technology where a farmer can speak Twi, and then the technology can transcribe it into English and be able to send text on their behalf. Right. So we're trying to find a way of using technology to build illiteracy bridges. But the reality is that we need to expand our educational system. So again, how can you use technology to create virtual classrooms? And Kenya, my friend Eric Hessman's Break just launched a product in Kenya just 2 weeks ago, where now you can actually take a brick into a village, connect them to the internet, and create a virtual classroom. Now, what that means is that now the content is on this device that goes into the rural area. So suddenly you can enable people in our self-communities to get access to MIT curriculum, because MIT now puts it online, it's free. The only thing is that they get connected and they can get access. So I think that this is some of the stuff I'm talking about. This technology that is going to be disrupting how education is delivered, right? And this is going to create a lot of inclusion. Anyway, I raise my hand.
No, thank you. Sharon, do you want to say something?
Yeah, quickly. I think from Nando's, it really is when you walk into our store in Washington or London, you're not buying an African product. You want great chicken. So the way we've made it relevant to create large companies back home is we've encouraged all our suppliers and all our countries that they will acquire the store layout, the furniture, the fittings, all the art on the wall is all African. So we inspiring African designers to achieve greatness. And it is about great design. We're not looking at mediocre. We build them up all the way to be great. On that basis, we can then offer them the offtake that they need to build their businesses and to make their businesses bankable when they have got a big company as their client. So if you come and visit our head office in South Africa, you will find that whatever's you see around you in terms of furniture, fittings, whatever, it's all local African design, it's all local African architecture, and that's what's used in the stores around the world.
Thank you. But on the broader side, though, I would say, actually, we really underestimate the impact, because we don't look at it, deeply, of large African companies. Actually, it's huge often when you look at the value chain, because you mentioned Nando on what they've had, but if you look at some companies into our distribution, I'll take one name. It just came to my mind. We have a company called Safal, and they do, how do you call it, roofing, but in kind of mixed zinc, aluminum, and a number of stuff like that. Now, it's a large company, but the company employs directly 4,000 people. But do you know how many people? Because we did a study to see the impact of some of our clients. They have 24,000 jobs that have been created through local distribution companies, people that are selling their products. And we are doing the same thing about some large agribusiness companies that we work with them because of the impact on the value chain, where they buy from the farmers and so on and so forth. So if they're integrated within the rest of the economy, this is a huge, huge, huge impact. And actually, that's one of the reasons I believe we need more large African companies. And there is something else, somebody else said earlier, in terms of demonstration effect. You cannot quantify it, but it's huge when you're talking to other people who want to come to invest and look at and what they can emulate or what can be done. Anyway, let's move to the second question. Anybody wants to start, make a pick?
On your question of
He's asking what was the second question, can you
or the younger generation, how the culture, yes, we all know that there's an unwritten cultural rule in Africa that the younger generation, you got to bid your time and your time will come. But I really think that when you, from what I do, so I'll give you a practical example. I was vetted in a company called SMSG 10 years ago. I met this, I called them my colleagues when they were in college. And they wanted to start this business. When they finished school, we started. And over 10 years, we built a business that was bootstrapped. We invested maybe, I think, $500 in total to a company. Last year revenue was almost $5 million. We built our own office. We employ about 55 people. We're in 3 countries in Africa. We have had no investment. We had no debt. We bootstrapped the company. The company went cash flow positive in the first year and kept growing. Right. Now, I give this example to just say, look, you don't have a choice, but you recognize us even if we're younger, a bunch of young kids, because we built something from nothing. Right. So what I tell a lot of my colleagues is that it's really about building something. It's about outcomes, right? So, yes, you can advocate, but if you build a business, you employ 50 people, the president of Ghana will invite you to his breakfast dinner, his breakfast or dinner, whether he likes it or not, whether you are young or not, right? So, I really think that that's what the youth should focus on, which we have an opportunity, and the barriers to building businesses have really come down. I mean, we started this company literally with no computers. We're smart guys. We figured out how to write a software, we figured out how to create value, and then we started going.
All right. Anybody else?
I mean, again, I think the African Investor team do a good job of being able to put this together. I think you ask a good question. It's an opportunity to figure out how that can happen as part of this, which is also to provide a platform for young people who are going to be the ones that create the next fast-growing companies on the continent, who are the ones that are creative and innovative and think about new ideas to apply to be able to get to where they want to get to. It does provide an opportunity to kind of figure out a way to incorporate them into these conversations. So I know Hubert and the team are going to think through that. So besides me being young, they can invite other people that, because that dialogue is obviously very critical. As a platform, we do it all the time, whether it's through our base meet sessions where we get young people speaking to business leaders, and we actually record it so that they can actually interact and understand how success is achieved, and also question some of the strategies. We do that as a platform, but I think it's more important to be able to do it in these sort of forums as well, beyond the web forums that do have young people participating in terms of how we solve the continent's challenge. So it's an opportunity, but I think this is a good start.
Thank you. Alex will ask you. Hubert, you need to link up with Alex. It will be a champion in making to reach out to that group because he's young like them. Any comment, Sharon?
I think it's a wonderful comment and question to the organizers of the event. I think you're absolutely right. We see it on the continent. There's a lot of shiny eyes in the youngsters that are making a massive difference. So certainly to the organizers, it's something to think about.
All right, thank you. Any burning question? Once, any burning question? Two, anybody? Three, done. Madam Barbara, you have the floor. Thank you very much, everybody.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.